Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. What a week, huh? I mean, it's unbelievable this week. It began when Jeffrey Epstein's estate turned over that birthday book with Trump's lewd drawing and signature in it, and boy, has the subject changed. There was a school shooting in Colorado this week. 16-year-old boy who, according to police, was radicalized by an extremist network that featured videos of mass shootings and neo-Nazi ideas. The student shot two others before killing himself. Same county, by the way, where the Columbine school shooting killed 14 people when America still cared about that sort of thing. Unbelievable. No one in the White House, of course, condemned the neo-Nazi or radical right-wing hatred. Nope, didn't happen. And then this week, Charlie Kirk, himself a right-wing propagandist, was murdered while speaking at a college campus. The president quickly blamed the assassination on, here's a quote, those on the radical left who have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric, the president said, is directly responsible for the terrorism that we are seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now. Right-wing influencers quickly claimed that this was an act of trans violence. A visibly angry Megyn Kelly looked right into the camera and said that the first thing she thought when she heard Charlie Kirk was shot was that it must be trans violence. The first thing she thought? All we know about Mr. Kirk's alleged assassin is that he was raised in a Republican household in rural Utah and became devoted to violent video games. That's in no way a radical leftist or trans. The Republican governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, begged America to walk away from their conspiracy theories. He begged for a common sense and common decency. Charlie Kirk's grieving widow, instead announced that the evildoers who did this have no idea what they've unleashed. For God's sake, I stand with Governor Cox and hate political violence like this. I do not believe we need to hate each other. No. I stand firmly, however, on the mountain of evidence that the source of violence and hate in America is coming from right-wing voices amplified by foreign trolls through social media. And one of those voices belongs to Donald Trump. How could Megyn Kelly's first thought be trans violence? How could Donald Trump's words, his first words, be so incendiary? Well, the same way Derek Chauvin thought it was okay to kneel on George Floyd's neck until he died. Their hatred blinds them to the truth. Their hatred blinds them to our common humanity. And you know what else it does? It binds them to a narrow and bitter world. That world must never become ours. I have a great show for you today. I'm cutting this beginning short because the first conversation I had, I actually recorded yesterday with Simon Rosenberg, and it's a little longer than usual, but worth every minute. Let's get right to it.
We're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
I am, of course, thrilled to be joined by Simon Rosenberg. Simon is a longtime Democratic strategist who turned his attention to building a community of support for candidates, for capacity building, and most importantly, for expanding the base. And that effort is, of course, Hopium, which has grown into a powerful force for exchanging ideas between candidates and a growing base. And it's also been a remarkable new source of funding for candidates who have needed it. Simon, welcome.
It's great to be here with you, Edwin.
Yeah. It's in the work that you've done in the short time that Hopium has been around has been an incredible boost, I think, to I know you wanted to get to 55%, but you can't get there without building the base, and this has been a really important part of that. And later we'll talk about that. But I think we have to start with violence, and we have to start with what we know about the Charlie Kirk shooting, what we know, what it says about us. And I just want, before we do that, I want to say that most Americans, despite the fact that you and I are in this world, most Americans have never heard of Charlie Kirk. Most Americans don't know what he stood for. Most Americans know there's a manhunt, somebody got shot again on the same day as a school shooting. It's incredible how our politics have been pulled in one direction that's not quite relevant to Americans.
Yeah, look, I want to, this is a difficult time for all of us. It's a difficult time for the country. We have an historically, we're in a time of enormous challenge for all of us. And I just want to say a few things to your listeners and the people watching today, is that we have to level set here, I think very importantly, that there is on the right an ideology that encourages violence. And in fact, the president has, if we go back to QAnon, which has been embraced by the president of the United States and by many Republicans, at the end state of QAnon was the assassination and killing of Democratic leaders on the Mall and the hanging of people like Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats. It was it had a violent end. And that's why you saw on January 6th, that famous noose. That noose was for Nancy Pelosi. That noose was for Mike Pence. That noose was part of the QAnon story, that the way that we had to deal with these pedophiles and this incredible craziness of QAnon was mass execution of Democrats, not of leaders. And so there has been inside the new right a sort of normalization of language around the dangers of the far left, of Democrats, of those people, of Trump's opponents, whatever it is. Even going back to Trump gave a speech on July 4th, 2020, in his first term, where he compared the radical left to the Nazis and to the communists and to the jihadis that needed to be killed and eliminated by the American military the way that they had been previously, the Nazis, the communists, the jihadis, putting me and you, Edwin, and our families and our ideological movement on a place where we should be attacked and by the American military. And so there is an incredible body of language and thought and argumentation around encouraging violence on the right against those other people. There is no such ideology on the left. It just doesn't exist. We don't have a radical left movement in America. In fact, our movement is desperately, ferociously fighting to preserve rule of law and democracy, battle illiberalism. Battling illiberalism is the central undertaking of our collective project. And we've seen millions and millions and millions of people this year, tens of millions of people protest legally without any incident. It's incredible how many people have been on the street this year. Yeah, peacefully, with no incidents of any kind, right? And and what are we doing? Channeling our frustration and anger about what's happening to our country. We're getting our candidates elected. We're raising money, right? We're knocking on doors. Mm-hmm. All of this is we're channeling our frustrations and worry about the future into democratic action in the way that you do in a democracy. That is not true on their side. And this notion that there's any kind of equivalence between the relationship to political violence on the right and us, as the president said on national television this morning, the president on Fox News, and I am angry about this morning, was given a softball question by the anchor on Fox this morning saying, we have radical people on the right too, Mr. President. Like, shouldn't we all come together? And he's like, no.
I saw that.
Yeah, the right-wing violence is justified based on DEI and crime and open borders. And what the president has, and what I've concluded from watching today, is where the president has ended up, or Donald Trump, because I don't like to call him the president because I don't think he acts like an American president, so we shouldn't give him that honorific, is that where this man has ended up in his physical, cognitive, and political decline, the frustration and anger that people are refusing to bend the knee, that Donald, that even Putin, his dear buddy, is humiliating him and chewing and throwing him around like a doggy chew toy every day, is that where he's ended up is that he's basically descending into just race war, right? Like just pure, unadulterated racial hatred, manifestation of just racial hatred against the other, hatred against the ideological opposition that has taken him down. And what he did today is he justified both state-led and vigilante violence against his opponents and against those people in a very direct way. This was not indirect. This was not subtle. And he's inflaming this because he actually wants some kind of sustained confrontation. It's why he's invaded D.C., where I live, right? I'm living in an occupied city. It's why he's threatening to go into Chicago, although you're them out. Yeah, so far. But now he's found New Orleans or Memphis, all very black cities, right? Again, all about this sort of subjugation of those people, because if they won't bend the knee willingly, he's going to bend it for them, right? Which is where he's ended up. And I think that my message to everyone today is that we should be outraged by this. This is not okay. This is unacceptable for any leader in any democracy to be behaving like this. And I'm just also personally frustrated and tired with the normalization of this kind of language and behavior that has been going on. Donald Trump yesterday openly talked about punching and beating up people on the left, justifying, again, creating justification for, political violence in the United States. He should not be, there should be calls for him to leave office because of this. And so I'm angry, Edwin, and I appreciate we just happened, and we need to be following the news here because I know there's a press conference going on. Yep. And if you see anything, let me know here. So Thank you for giving me my opening statement here.
No, I think it was great. And look, Simon, the president isn't just calling. I mean, the fomenting of political violence on the right, as you point out, is real. But there is political violence on the right? We had a legislator murdered, murdered in Minnesota.
Multiple, by the way. Right? This was not just one, but this was a long list. He was working his way down through the list.
Yeah.
He shot 2 more people 7 and 8 times who did not die, fortunately, right? He even killed the friggin' dog and so, this was and
that isn't alone, because we have judges who are being attacked. We had Nancy Pelosi's husband who was attacked, but they went for her. I mean, and what Donald Trump is telling his army out there, his private army, is, I'll pardon you. I'll pardon you.
Right.
I'll pardon you. Do this. There is no consequence on the right for political violence. And what I heard the last few days, and just these are my ears, and correct me if I think I'm wrong, but you and I do not condone political violence at all. Charlie Kirk's murder was horrific, period. And even though you and I have nothing in common with the guy, except that we're human beings and we don't shoot each other. I think that making politics and speech unsafe for some has now made it unsafe for all. And I think that that Donald Trump and his gang never imagined that was possible. They thought they could unleash political violence across America, condone it, pardon it, and somehow it would only hit us. And I think they're afraid, Simon. What I've heard in this is fear.
The kid who shot Trump a year ago was a right winger, right? I mean, he wasn't and you remember the same thing happened, right? That we went through this thing where somehow they're blaming trans and, leftists and, they even, and, a year ago when the president was, the attempt to shoot the president or Donald Trump at that time, and yes, because people on the right are awash in guns, awash in justification, and what the thing that should be upsetting to us today is that the president is continuing to create justification for the violence. What he said this morning on Fox News, yes, he's pardoned people, suggesting that if you commit right-wing political violence, I'll have your back, which was an encouragement of this kind of activity. But what he said this morning was that the anger that exists among right-wing radicals is justified. Right. That they are justified to become radicalized. That the radicalization, which he then goes on about crime, right, which is, of course, Willie Horton. I mean, we've lived all this, since the Southern strategy came upon us in the mid-1960s, is that this sort of exploitation of racial fear, which is the central driving force of all the Republican Party domestically since the mid-1960s, is just manifests itself. And what Trump has done is that I do believe that what we're, that all of, Stephen Miller had another one of these kind of wild posts in the last few days about this dark force that's destroying the country that needs to be fought, very similar to the language that they used in this White House speech on July 4th in 2020 about sort of this mounting, conspiracy against American values. And, and the truth is, what's so absurd about this is that no one has been less American. No one has been less faithful to the Constitution. No one has been less faithful to the great American project than Donald Trump and Stephen Miller. And that for them to have evoked this sort of wrapping themselves in the flag and patriotism, when there's an unprecedented effort to undermine and abandon the U.S. Constitution and the global rules-based order that has created unprecedented peace and prosperity in the world over the last 80 years, right? They're doing more to undermine, a rules-based order abroad and at home than any two Americans have ever done in all of our history. And so I do think that we are at a moment, I'll just say, Edwin, that part of my takeaway from today is that I think it's been very difficult for our current set of political leaders as Democrats to really understand how to navigate in these unprecedented times, that no one as an American has ever lived in a period like this before. This is unprecedented in our history, and that we don't have great sort of stories and examples in history that we can draw on in order to inspire our work, right? And the only analogous story is really the founding of the country itself, when we built an entire democratic system that would be, not a system of oligarchs and monarchy, but of we the people. But I think that our leaders have struggled to understand the playing field, the battle, the battlefield that we're on now, the playing field that we're on now, and to have created an adequate response to it. And I think that this moment has to become clarifying for Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and for other Democratic leaders, that we're not going to be able to only engage with them on the economy and healthcare, that there is this other set of issues that we have to develop a robust and muscular conversation with the American people about.
I am more optimistic about that, partly because I don't live in D.C. Out in the rest of the country, Democrats, whether they're governors or state legislators, have found their voice. And there's an experiment going on with what's the most effective way to counter this going around the country. That's why primaries are so helpful. I'm confident we will come up through this primary season and the presidential primary season with candidates who know how to, who experience in campaigning will help them figure out how to counter this directly. But I see it everywhere in the country. I agree with you. Our leadership in Congress is is not yet living in the era the rest of us live in, right? This is not business as usual. And strongly worded letters are, I was going to say, fire starters, but we don't even have fires anymore like that. They're just not, they're not meeting the moment for sure. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that in a different way. I don't want to be defensive at all. I think we need to go on the offense, and I mean offense both rhetorically and geographically. I just don't think anymore it's appropriate to only complain about Donald Trump. And even our anger masks something more powerful, which is our aspirations. You and I have a vision for the future of America that actually includes everybody who's here, right? It is a powerful, wonderful vision that these guys hate and are afraid of. They hate it like they hate us. And I think we can beat them on values, and we can certainly beat them on, oh my God, how effective is your leadership? I mean, you pick a topic. We could talk about foreign policy, disaster, the tariffs and the economy, disaster. Americans would like to come together. They don't even try. Common decency. They're a disaster.
Yeah, look, I think, I gave a talk to my community within the last few days and wrote a piece yesterday about how our North Star through this must be democracy, rule of law, freedom, love of country, and love of one another, right? Yeah. And that has to be our North Star. And I wrote this, in part in response to what had happened, the terrible and tragic killing of Charlie Kirk, and that we can't lose sight that our North Star, our place that we have to go every day when we get up in the morning, right, when we try to orient ourselves in this time of incredible confusion and disinformation and just all the stuff hurtling at us every day, that, we're the warriors we're the proud, plucky patriots that love our country and are, expressing that love of country and our love of democracy and rule of law and freedom through all the democratic means that we've been discussing here, Edwin, right? Through respectful debate and forging new media organizations like Hopium and the work that you do. And I know you've been doing a lot of work with Lincoln Square, too, my good friends over there, who I often collaborate with, is that, our response has been to reinforce democracy in a time of challenge, not to undermine it. And I think this is really, really important. This is in some ways, to me, is sort of the fundamental divide between us and them right now, which is that we're a movement that believes in, we're a pro-democracy movement, and they're a movement that is advancing illiberalism and a different understanding of how we should all be organized in civil society. It's an incredible betrayal of the country. And I do agree with you that part of our opportunity now, and I had on in the last few days at Hopium, I had on John Ossoff, who gave a very inspiring talk, and Ruben Gallego, who won a very difficult Senate race in a tough place. And I had on Rita Hart, who's the state chair of Iowa, who talked about winning in red places and red states. I do think that we have to be focused on expansion, right? They are in control of the House, the Senate. They have too many. We need to learn together how to win in more red states and red places in the coming months. Hopium is about to make a big set of investments in this. I'll be challenging my community to not only be supporting people like Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill, the people who are on the ballot in November, but also to really start investing money in red states and red places in a far more strategic manner than we have in the past, to recognize that this is hard work, but not impossible. And that we have to, and it won't happen unless we try, right? That's the whole point, right? Unless you can't score unless you shoot, Edwin, right? And I love state chairs. I really do. Their job is unbelievable. And some of them do such a good job. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about going to red places, up here in the Great Lakes, there was a Republican lock for a long time. Then we broke the gerrymander in Michigan. Then we broke the gerrymander in Wisconsin. And all of that was about keep turning out our votes where we had them, but making inroads in the reddest parts of those states enough to make the difference. And every cycle, I think maybe we'll get closer in Texas. Maybe we'll get closer in Florida. And you know what? We have to take one of those states off the table at some point.
And I think working on that is enormously important. The work that your friend and mine, Anderson Clayton, does in North Carolina is transformative in that state, in the Supreme Court races and things. We need to do more of that. What do you think about Texas and Florida?
Yeah, look, we're going to, I haven't announced this yet, but I mean, we're going to be announcing an investment.
Usually make news.
Yeah.
Right.
An investment fund that will be initially raising money for the Florida, Texas, Iowa, Maine, and Alaska Democratic parties.
That's great.
And that will be like the work we did. We raised $1.1 million for the North Carolina Democratic Party last cycle. We were the largest investor. And that state, everyone should realize, is that by the way, we are getting breaking news here in this press conference that's happening. And while I'm talking, if you want to scour the news, and I'll let you update people here, because we're learning more about him as a young man. Tyler Robinson, who's 22 years old, who's the one who's been arrested, taken into custody. That we're going to focus on Iowa and Alaska and Maine, because these are places where we don't necessarily have a settled candidate for the Senate yet. And there may, in some of these states, in Iowa and Maine, there's going to be multi-candidate primaries. And in Alaska, we just don't have our field is set yet. But it doesn't mean we can't be supporting the party there now, getting them ready. If we want to try to flip the Senate, we're going to have to try to win in one of these places next year. So it's an ambitious, risky strategy that we'll be taking. And then we're also going to invest in Florida and Texas, because in Texas, we also are going to have a multi-candidate primary for the Senate now, with James Tallarico getting in. And that if you look at the map, the presidential map, so those first three states are sort of Senate related in this cycle. The presidential map, because of the shift of the population in the United States from bluer places to redder places, in the next redistricting that takes place and the reapportionment after the census in 2032 or in 2030, there will be a shift of where the Republicans will pick up electoral college votes, and that our blue wall will erode a little bit. We don't yet know the exact number, but it means that we have to put more states in play at the presidential level, that we can't be satisfied with the current battleground. And historically, the next set of states have been Florida and Texas. And these are states that are enormous. They'll be very expensive, but the family is going to have to get ready to invest hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to make these states competitive. We don't really have a choice. And the other thing that's happened, and Ruben Gallego talked about this at length in my interview with him a few days ago, that Trump has burned his bridges with the Hispanic community, and that we have not only through his racial profiling and targeting of Hispanic families, but through the assault on healthcare and on and the tariff increases. Hispanics are the most uninsured. They gain the most from the ACA. They have the least amount of family wealth. So this kind of rising prices, assault on healthcare, is also a war on Hispanic families, and then he believes we have unprecedented opportunity, and so we're going to create an expansion investment fund that we're going to be rolling out in the next few days to target these places where we simply must learn how to win in some of them. We don't have to win in all of them. Mm-hmm. But again, if we don't try, we can't score unless you shoot, and we learned last cycle. I mean, the two major projects my community was involved in were North Carolina, which was the most successful down ballot state below the presidential in the country, and then Arizona, where we were Ruben Gallego's largest donor. We went in very early there. And Ruben Gallego, just so everybody knows, I mean, Arizona was Kamala Harris did the worst of all the battleground states in Arizona, and Ruben was able to overcome that. It was an extraordinary victory. And those are the places we invested. We also were very involved in flipping 7 House seats last cycle. We're some of the largest investors in the whole country in a series of House races. So we're going to take that kind of same strategy of expansion and growth and winning in the hard places towards what is open to us this cycle, which is a different map and different opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, and some of the growth in places like Texas and Florida is people from blue states moving for whatever reasons, but they don't leave behind who they are when they get there. And when their daughters go to those states and are told, please register with us so we know if you're, trying to flee the state in order to have an abortion, they're going to say, wait a minute, we didn't sign up for this just because we moved here for a job. So I think we do have some opportunities that to bring some sense there. And I mean, that's part of what happened in Arizona. The population changed. It wasn't the one it was 20 years ago.
Well, it changed, and Ruben Gallego, like Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, Ruben Gallego was part of a bunch of young political activists 20 years ago, because I met Ruben for the first time at an event that I presented about the Hispanic vote in Phoenix in 2004. Ruben and I met for the first time when he was young and just a street kid in Phoenix. There was an orchestrated effort to change the electorate in Arizona, right? Voter registration, just in the way that Stacey Abrams did in Georgia over a long period of time. Ruben was the leader of an effort and has now ridden that all the way to the Senate, all these years later. And it's been amazing for me to watch Ruben go from being an activist to a state legislator to a congressman, now to a senator. And we've been friends through this whole period. But Ruben deserves a lot of credit. And I think for those of you who are watching this and who live in states that are not blue or purple and have aspiration for turning those states to become more democratic. I mean, part of what Edwin and I are talking about today is about strategy, right? I mean, I was involved in creating the Hispanic strategy and the millennial strategy for the Democratic Party 20 years ago. I did the first bilingual poll of Hispanics that was ever done. I did the first poll of millennials. We took that research and argued that there was a new electorate that we could run into that would expand our coalition. And you know what happened? Right? From 1992 to 2004, Democrats, I'm now going to forget my own numbers here, but Democrats averaged 47% of the vote, I think, in those presidential elections. After identifying this new coalition of expansion of Hispanics and millennials, and we invested into it, we averaged 51% of the vote from 2008 to 2020. Yep. We fell down a little bit this time because in part that coalition unraveled for us in 2024. But we've gone through this process as a family where we've identified demographic and geographic opportunities for us and then invested towards them, and we're very successful. We need to do that again now with a different set of maps, a different electorate, a different time, a different set of politics, but with the same strategic intent. Right.
We also, I think we have, this is both strategy, but it also is governing. There's something we have to do to shore up the votes in the Black community. And I say that because when I go talk to folks who live in Black neighborhoods in Chicago about what's going on. And they say, we see all you white guys protesting what's going on all over the country, and you don't like the fact that they're sending police to police your community. You don't like the fact that you feel like your civil rights are being violated, that nobody cares about your human rights. Welcome to our world. We've lived through this for so long. There's a little bit of, let's sit back and let you guys carry this weight for a while in the Black community. And that I worry that's, leading to some voter apathy, which I think we have to address head on by talking about policies that really will address the wealth gap, begin to make America work for everybody in ways that it really, hasn't for a while.
Listen, there's no question. I mean, I think it's very important. I think one of the great, there are these sort of memes and sort of things that exist in our family's discourse that are unhelpful to us. And one of them is this notion of base and swing, right? Which there's a base voters and swing voters. And I have been warring against that sort of framework for over 20 years because what we are is a coalition. And when you think of ourselves as a coalition, it means that we need to be talking to and honoring and engaging and working with all elements of the coalition, not viewing some as base, meaning you can ignore them and put all your energy into the swing, but you have to put all of your energy into everybody, right? We need everybody, rowing in the same boat together. And it's a very different kind of way of thinking about politics. And that's why in my own commentary, I talk about coalitions. I don't talk about base and swing, which is in some ways creates the kind of politics that you're describing, right? Which is that we can take people for granted because we know they're going to vote for us, and we have to go out and use. And part of that, Edwin, just so you know, that comes from a period where the Democratic Party had less resources and where, the Republicans always had more money than us, and that we were less. Now, though, because of the internet and because of Act Blue and because of the passion and love of country that our grassroots, Democrats all across the country, the proud, plucky patriots that we are pouring into. Yep. We now are in a time of abundance and not scarcity. And so some of those strategies that were built in a time of scarcity need to be, abandoned. Yeah, right. For strategies that are more consistent with the moment that we're in. And I think that we are, that, yes, you're right. There are people in our coalition who feel that we don't talk to them, or we only come to them in the last 2 weeks before an election. And, and that's why we have to, central to my sort of I have a series of 7 recommendations I make to the family about things we need to get better at. And one of them is that we have to operate 24/7, 365. We can't view it as there's a time for governing and a time for campaigning, right? Is that we have to be communicating and talking about our values and our beliefs and our accomplishments and our aspirations every day, right? Because, and not govern for 18 months and then campaign for 3 months, right? That just can't be that's also a remnant of a previous political age, right? That doesn't exist any longer. And we still are operating. Many of our leaders are still operating. And I would argue that's part of our frustration with Chuck Schumer, right? I
agree with that. And I think it's partly you see it in the New York mayor's race. It just, there's a sort of 90s view of triangulation that is just not, we're in a different place right now.
We're in a different place. And I think that, when I founded Hopium 2.5 years ago in my own
only 2.5 years.
Yeah, I know. It seems like a decade. I don't know.
Right after. It's just not launching.
I know. But I mean, the last 2.5 years feels like 10 years or 20 years. I don't know. COVID felt like 100 years. This feels like a long time. But in my opening statement about why Hopium, I was founding Hopium, and it was that I felt that our leaders didn't understand the nature of the conflict that we were in today, and that we were operating off of kind of antiquated understandings of politics across many fronts, and that a lot of the work that I did at my old organization, NDN, was like a private think tank for Democrats. We looked at strategies for how to grow our coalition, for how to be successful in a new media environment, how to conquer issues that are new and emergent, and to get on the right side of them and to understand them and to make them and to develop strategies for how to talk about these new emergent things. And I want to just reflect on something I wanted to say in the beginning, is that I think the last, Edwin, and I think you'll understand this because I think J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois Democrats have really been exemplars. And I'm in touch with Pritzker's team about him coming to speak to Hopium. We're going to get that booked. I've been very proud. Proud's not the right word. I've been very inspired by the kind of muscularity and forthrightness and simplicity of his language, right? I think that what's incredible about him as a leader is that that what he's saying he believes, and that the words are his, and that it's integrated and powerful, and that he's not reading a script written for him by other people. Mm-hmm. That J.B. Pritzker has a very potent and impressive belief system that is grounding him this time when it's too easy to get blown around by the events of the day. And I just want to say that one of the areas that I have really thought about a lot over the last few days is there have been voices in our family advocating that we compromise with Trump on DEI, on crime, on the occupation of cities, on immigration. And I think that this is naive, and I think that this is naive. And I think that one of the things that I've learned, if I can just sort of reflect on this in a messy kind of way, because I don't have this all thought out, is that, the work that I did in the Hispanic community, I think was, and I come from immigrants on all sides, and I'm a ethnic mutt, like many New Yorkers and Chicagoans and from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And my wife's family is also an ethnic mutt from all over the world. And, part of the reason I became so involved in the fight around immigration over the last 20 years was that I felt, as a child, a grandson of immigrants, I felt blessed and lucky that my grandparents somehow made the decision to come here and to give me and my family the opportunity to live here as opposed to the places where they were from. And so I felt that I had to pay it forward. I mean, this was very kind of a powerful, animating principle of mine. And so what I just want to say about this is that the DEI, crime, open borders, is just unadulterated racism, right? We can't, in any way compromise on and sort of sugarcoat or put lipstick on the Trumpian pig on this sort of racial assault against people of lesser means and of different race, the perniciousness of white supremacy. I wrote a big magazine article in 2020, and I'll wrap this up because this is a little bit rambling. But in 2020, I was asked to write a magazine piece right before the election about my hopes for the Biden presidency. And I laid out all the things I hoped he'd do. And at the end, I said, but there's one big thing I hope he does more than anything else, which is that he needs to denounce white supremacy as a failed and absurd, anachronistic faith that needs to be put into the dustbin of history, for all time, and that we need to delegitimize it as a central project of the Biden presidency. Because the idea that when you look at China and India or Brazil, and that those are people that are somehow are not part of the universal human journey, and that they can't do what we can do, this whole notion that somehow white people in this world are somehow superior to all the other people of the world. Maybe, we could have believed that 150 or 200 years ago, but today it's an absurdity, right? Yeah. And so we have an obligation. I think that we have to understand now that one of our central collective projects, Edwin, together, is to face white supremacy head on and defeat it. And this is something that that project has reignited in me in recent days. And it's going to be a core part of the Hopium journey over the coming months.
I mean, I'm so thrilled to hear that in a way. I mean, and what I tell audiences and I speak to that are white is that white supremacy isn't about you guys in this room. It is not really about white supremacy. It's about the supremacy of a handful of white billionaires. And they use this to create policies that don't help any person in this room. They don't. This is a base lie that makes people afraid of each other so that powerful people can become more powerful at everyone's expense. Everyone's expense. And God help us if we say to the black scientist who is about to give us in fact did give us the vaccine for COVID, oh, you know what, you can't be in the lab, right? How many more people died? I mean, my gosh, we are so much better off for the contributions of everybody in this country, and we can't afford to put anybody on the sidelines, and no one benefits. No one benefits from this kind of bigotry.
Listen, I worked for Bill Clinton in 1992. And
you and me both.
Yeah, and I there are two just reflections I have, right? One is that he used to have this line that racism and white supremacy, in essence, kept his state dumb and poor for 100 years, right? That it was for somebody who grew up in the Acela corridor in the East Coast of the United States, working, I lived in Little Rock for 6 months, being in a campaign that was so much about the emergence of the South from, he picked another Southerner to be on the ticket with him, right, about sort of the new South and emerging from, the rubble of the failed Reconstruction that we had, right, and the Civil Rights movement, but he also, I also was at this sort of famous set of events that happened in the spring of 1992, where Clinton gave the same speech about race in Macomb County to a white audience, and then the next day to a black audience in Northwest Detroit. And I was there for the speech in Detroit, not the Macomb County one. And I was part of the team. I was the state director of Michigan in the primary in 1992. And I was part of the team that put this whole theory together, that Trump had to talk about overcoming our differences. Clinton had to talk about overcoming our differences. And, the New York Times, after those two speeches, editorialized that this was the closest moment to the Robert Kennedy speech and after Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968. And I was so proud to be part of that. And not everything that Clinton did was perfect, right? And he was an imperfect man, but a brilliant man, and who had extraordinary aspirations for the American people. And I do think that we are at a moment again, going back to the way we started this conversation, which is, many of our, many of our brothers and sisters in our coalition feel ignored or overlooked by us. Well, these are fixable problems, right? But a lot of it comes down to, white folks got to have more courage. White folks have to buck up a little bit here and lead and not accept, what is being done in our name, by this awful man. And that, we have to fight this battle and take this on our shoulders far more aggressively. This is not just a fight for Hispanics and Black people and Asian people and immigrants, but it's our fight. And because Trump has put this on the table. His remarks today to me on Fox News were a before and after moment in this evolution of our understanding of just how pure he believes that his mission, his governing project, his central governing project is now to launch a race war in the United States for white people against the invaders, the unworthy, those people. He keeps saying, by the way, those people is the line, right? I know we've gone on a long time today, Edwin, and I appreciate you letting me rant about this. I'm very energized and angry and frustrated this morning.
Let me bring it to a close with something else Bill Clinton said, because Donald Trump made it clear today, but he's made it clear every day that he has a terrible vision for our future, and his policies we now know are devastatingly bad for everybody who lives here, for the whole world. There's a lot wrong with our country right now, an enormous amount. And that we have a president of the United States who is a lawless man with the worst values and no interest in the things that has made our country great over the years. That is a terrible place to be. And the rise of political violence is terrifying. And yet, based on all the things we've talked about in this conversation, the line of Bill Clinton's that comes to me is there is nothing wrong with America that cannot be fixed by what is right with America.
Yeah, look, I think, as I have said in my own writing the last few weeks, I think that something changed in July and August in our collective understanding of Trump. Yep. And that we entered here in the fall with this sort of, it became impossible now, I think, for reasonable people, the non-MAGA part of America, 60, 65% of the country, whatever the number is, right? To see Trump as doing anything other than doing enormous harm to the country. Yeah. And that there was no longer kind of a place where you could comfort yourself to say, well, it's not going to be this bad, or that it's all going to be okay on the other end unless we sort of significantly. And I think where Democrats have to really change our strategic orientation now because of this collective and deepening understanding that he's doing ongoing material harm to the country every day, and he's breaking things that will be difficult, if not impossible, to repair. That we not only have to have this place we go that, well, he's doing all this and therefore we'll win elections. It's okay. We'll win elections and that we'll be able to restore things back in 2027. But that we have to mitigate the damage he's doing now. We have to do both. And I think for too many of our leaders, there's been this sense that, well, he's f***ing up and that we'll be able to clean up after 2026. We'll have a good midterm. Yeah. He'll be repudiated. I think that's naive. I think that sort of view is no longer available to us as a family, that we have to be doing what J.B. Pritzker and Gavin Newsom and the Texas Democrats did, which is to mitigate the damage and to fight him more forcefully. You and I, we don't know what's going to happen in Illinois, but certainly today it looks like Trump has now moved on to other areas of the country that he's going to really focus on. We don't know that, right? But for now, he's now trying to find, because it looks like there's going to be legitimate and serious opposition that he's not sure, because at the end of the day, he's a coward, right? And he doesn't actually really like to fight. And so I'll just end with you is that I think the other sort of big new opening we have is to be far more ambitious about mitigating the damage. And what I have proposed at Hopium is a 4-part agenda for Democrats for the fall, because I think our political aspiration has to be to win the fall, not just win the elections, but win the big debate. He's losing every debate, every major issue he's underwater on. In the last week, he's even been underwater on crime and on border security, right, which means that he's now under 50 on literally every issue in the country. That should encourage us to be ambitious and aggressive and to go after him even harder. And so the agenda that I've laid out is a 4-part agenda. One is to roll back the tariffs that are, causing so much harm to the American people and to our economy, our standing in the world. It's taxation without representation. It's illegal, unconstitutional, and we need to roll them back. Second is that we should be, fighting with everything we can to roll back the ICE increase and to keep troops off of our streets, and that this sort of creation of a private political police force for the president is un-American, illiberal, and we have to fight it with all the bones in our body, as you guys are doing in Chicago. Third is this assault on science and higher ed and public health. The cutting of Medicaid and ACA, is destructive. It's sabotage for the United States. And then finally, fourth is that, we need to be standing with Ukraine and our European allies and not with Putin, and that we need to be defending democracy here and all around the world. These are the 4 pillars of what I think could become an offensive agenda for the Democrats as we go into ideological and rhetorical battle with Trump and the right, and as a set of guideposts for how we're going to engage. And I think we're seeing progress in that. Schumer said he's going to bring the tariffs up to a vote. They're going to fight really hard to delay the Medicaid and ACA cuts, right? Yeah. We're seeing, I'd like them to fight a little bit harder on the occupation of D.C., frankly, given where I live. And certainly I think you're starting to see rumblings about Ukraine. So I think what my advice to all of your viewers and listeners is that your job now as proud, plucky, patriotic Americans is to continually be talking to your political leaders about what's expected of them now. Yep. To encourage them to find a higher gear and to fight harder, and to call even your Democratic offices for the House and the Senate, state legislature, governor, wherever you are, to encourage them to continue to fight harder, because they took an oath of office. They need to obligate it. They need to fight for our country and our Constitution.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. That was fabulous, wasn't it? Now, I'm also I did enjoy that. We're going to enjoy this, too, because I'm joined, let's get my words straight today, everyone, by the fabulous Amanda Marcotte, who is the senior politics writer at Salon, the author of Troll Nation, How the Right became Trump worshiping monsters set on rat effing liberals, America, and truth itself. You should sign up for her newsletter and podcast, both called Standing Room Only. They are helpful and a ton of fun. Hi, Amanda. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So you and I just heard the news, and the news talked about this incident where ICE shot and killed a man in Chicago. And I just listened carefully, and what I heard was they stopped a guy. He was scared. He drove his car. He hit and was dragging an ICE agent who shot and killed him. And I just urge everyone, because we have had too much of this week, to let's get the facts. I mean, it's hard to imagine being hit by a car and dragged by a car and still having the wherewithal to pull your gun and shoot somebody while you're being dragged by a car at space. Let's just wait and get all the facts before we decide just to believe anything that comes out of our government. And I say that because, gee whiz, somebody in ATF leaked that the shooter in Utah was a big trans violence thing. Be careful when you hear them. Amanda, I'm sorry to start that way.
No, I think you're right. I think that one of the things that is very difficult, especially for journalists to wrap their heads around, is that our government is not a reliable source of information anymore. I think that, it's always wise to be skeptical, but in the past, I think there was a certain amount of trust that journalists could put in government, especially official government, communications, because it used to be that places like the FBI or ICE or other law enforcement agencies, especially on the federal level, were more careful about what they said. But nowadays they're being run by a bunch of clowns who see their purpose as political before they do enforcing the law. And so they have every incentive to sow disinformation or even outright lie.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, journalists have to learn the same lesson that federal judges have learned. When the Justice Department shows up in court, it's not clear they're telling the truth anymore. And that's a crime. So journalists, wasn't it a few years ago, wasn't it Trump won? Was it Stephen Miller? I can't remember. No, it wasn't Stephen Miller, but one of those guys testified saying, I don't know the journalists the truth. I never tell them the truth. Why would I tell journalists the truth? Yeah, terrible. Don't believe them.
Yeah, don't believe them.
All right.
ICE hides their faces. Like, they're letting us know who they are.
Yeah, right. By not letting us know who they are. Yeah. Hey, I shared with my community a piece I wrote recently about Trump's cabinet. The worst people. I was struck that, and it really bothered me. I was walking my dog in the morning, and it occurred to me there is literally no one in the top levels of American government that I could admire. Not one person. I don't think I've ever had, and I'm not young, a government entirely composed of fools, crooks, toadies, people in over their heads, racists, rapists, fascists. But here we are. And you have focused your sharp wit on a few of them, but also on somebody who's not in the cabinet, who got, I think, a particularly good look from you. Why don't you tell everybody about Carolyn Leavitt? Because, while we're on the topic of the government doesn't tell the truth, she's a pretty good example.
Yeah, Caroline Leavitt, I think it's true that the press secretary of the White House always has to do some amount of spin work, right? But Caroline Leavitt, her job is not communicating with the public. Her job is lying to the public. Her job is constantly gaslighting and spinning for Trump. And sometimes the lies she tells with a straight face are so outrageous that you realize that it's not just that she knows she's lying. She knows that she's lying. Everybody knows that it's a lie. And basically she's just sort of trying to it's beyond lying at this point. She's trying to remove the meaning of words entirely to sort of reduce everything into politics into noise. So the only thing that matters is whether you have a R or a D by your name. And it gets completely outrageous. I mean, the latest article I wrote about her, like, there's this situation with the Epstein files where the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed a bunch of documents from Jeffrey Epstein's estate. Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know why I blanked on that. Jeffrey Epstein.
This is a crazy week. They showed up this week, a week ago. It's hard to believe. It feels like a year ago.
Yeah, and so inside those documents was a birthday book. It was just a bunch of letters and jokes and stuff from his friends. And one of the jokes was a friend of his who had a giant check mocked up, allegedly from Donald Trump to Jeffrey Epstein for the purchase of what was a fully depreciated woman. That was the quote, right? And no one thought that this check was real. Like, the whole point of the page in the book was it was a joke. The joke was that Jeffrey Epstein had passed some woman on to that she had aged, basically that she got too old for him. Probably she was a whole 20 years old or something. And so he took these damaged goods and gave them to his friend Trump. And, the joke was that this was the cost of this quote unquote fully depreciated woman. And when Caroline Leavitt was asked about this, she said, "Is that actually Donald Trump's signature on that check?" And the reporter was like, "Well, no, because it was a joke. Nobody actually thought Donald Trump had actually written this check." And it was like such a weird moment because she was lying about what she thought the question was. She was lying about the answer. She was pretending to be stupid. And the reporter was, I think they didn't even know what to do with that, because it's like that. No one said that Donald Trump signed this check. They are saying that this joke, the fact that this joke check existed, was referring to a set of practices that he and Jeffrey Epstein reportedly had that their friends were joking about, and that was the real issue. But she used that to sort of deflect from talking about the real issue, which is Trump was close enough to Jeffrey Epstein that apparently they reportedly passed women to each other.
And it is his signature on the drawing he made, for gosh sakes.
Yeah. So she was also conflating another issue, which is the birthday card that Trump sent to Jeffrey Epstein. That absolutely looks like his signature, and he's pretending it doesn't, and he's lying about that.
I don't understand. I had trouble with this when it was now Governor Sanders, but I don't understand it at all. I don't understand why journalists go to the press briefings. They do not ever get the truth. The purpose of these press briefings is, the president's busy, the administration has work to do, so we create this role of press secretary, ostensibly to help reporters understand what's going on in our government so they can share that with the American people. What a quaint, old-fashioned idea. Doesn't exist anymore. The White House uses that role not to bother with reporters' questions, but to take reporters' questions as an opportunity then to look into the camera and say something completely different that's all spin. Why do journalists go?
Very few of them actually do anymore. I don't know if that's by their choice, but if you actually look at who's asking questions during the White House press briefings these days, it's mostly right-wing outlets, and they're not journalists. They're just propagandists. They're like a few journalists sprinkled in there, but most of the people in there are asking questions like, how wonderful is Leader Trump today, and how beautiful do his farts smell?
Yeah,
and is he taller?
Isn't his tie charming? Yeah, yeah, right. But that stuff still gets picked up by the regular press and passed on. I don't, I just think anymore there's use your resources to go find out what he's actually doing and tell the country that.
Yeah, there is the problem, I think, still of people taking what they say and not what they do seriously. And we need to stop listening to the words that come out of their mouths, because we can just assume that that's a lie. It's always a lie. And instead, I think part of the problem, of course, is the grind of the daily news cycle is so fast nowadays, and it's almost impossible to report out stories on the schedule of turning over news that people expect these days. And so instead, reporters rely on a bunch of quotes and not a lot of research. And it's tough. And I totally understand that as somebody who's done plenty of reporting, but it's like, I feel for everybody in this situation, but I think that the problem here is that there needs to at least be more skepticism about what Caroline Leavitt says, because most of what she says is lies.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's so damaging. I went online, and, in the hours, in the day after, the day after Charlie Cook was murdered, and, putting his murder, and I saw the Google results came back, and I was just focused on news organizations and what they said. And I got an entire page that was all about, and every single news story was about trans violence and this attack. That was the news for a full day. And of course, it wasn't news. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't true. It was nothing. And it was reported as news because the Wall Street Journal rushed to make it news. Because somebody in ATF leaked something as if it were news. Now we know none of it's true. So, I mean, I just think journalists owe us to be a little more careful.
Yeah, and in this particular case, like, part of the problem, too, is that we are in a legitimate, moral panic right now over trans identities. I think it's been stoked for years by the right and by people like J.K. Rowling, and outlets like, unfortunately, the New York Times and the Atlantic have been overly credulous for years about stories saying that trans identities are on the rise in some dramatic way, that it's a social contagion, that it's a sign of some deep sickness in our society. And so there's a lot of people in journalism right now who have had their perceptions distorted in such a way that they were ready to hear that trans people are going on mass shooting sprees left and right, when if you think about it just for even a minute, that seems a little bit ludicrous. It's, there's just not that many trans people.
And I look, there's an institute, the Williams Institute, it tracks gun violence, it tracks mass shootings around the country. 98% are men, 2% have been, women, is rounding, and less than 1% have been people who are trans. So, yeah, right. I guess that means it's the epidemic of trans shooting, less than 1%. I mean, there is a social contagion in America that's dangerous, and it's the one you hear on the right. It's the one that says hate your neighbor. It's the one that says we don't care if you kneel on George Floyd's neck, but don't come for one of ours. It's just awful stuff, and that is contagious and it is dangerous. But you don't have to look very hard to find that, so it's not a scoop.
Yeah, and I think as we've seen with the reactions to Charlie Kirk's death, it's been frustrating because I think it's perfectly possible to be a responsible person who says you cannot, political violence is wrong, killing people is wrong. None of that means that Charlie Kirk was a good person or that he wasn't the source of a lot of the problems of our society, including spreading disinformation, creating, actively recruiting young people into hateful ideologies that often radicalize them and make them more likely to, commit acts of violence.
Yep. And you and I both, we fully agree on that. And I want to give credit where it's possible on the other side. You can also buy some of Charlie Kirk's rhetoric and not believe in the kind of violence that he espoused. I thought the governor of Utah did a fine job.
Yeah, I would say most people that buy into Charlie Kirk's politics don't act out violently and probably would say that it's wrong.
Yep.
I think most people aren't violent. But I think it's also important to recognize that dehumanizing rhetoric of the kind that he peddled is the first step towards violence. And often what happens in these kinds of fascist movements is that, and well, we're seeing it right now, right? So what we're seeing right now is not necessarily like a lot of vigilante violence, though that is happening. But the situation with ICE, I would say, is a kind of classic example of what we're talking about, which is people like Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump and Stephen Miller have been pushing dehumanizing rhetoric about, and J.D. Vance for a long time, about immigrants. They've been saying things like that they kill pets and that they're dirty and that they're rapists and that they're murderers. And millions of Americans believe that. Now, are most of these Americans doing violence against immigrants? No.
No.
But they are supporting it when ICE does violence against immigrants. And, not to go Nazi every time I'm on your show, not to go talking about Nazis, but obviously it's a kind of classic example is once people bought into Nazi lies about Jewish people, most Germans didn't kill Jews themselves, but they stood by and let the SS do it. And they didn't protest, and they quietly supported it. And we're seeing the same thing happen in the United States. We're seeing not the majority, thankfully the majority of Americans see what ICE is doing and they're appalled by it. But a large plurality of Americans see what ICE is doing and they're either fine with it or actively rooting it on. So they may not themselves be doing violence, or because ICE is state-sanctioned violence, they may not understand that as political violence, but it absolutely is, and they're absolutely signing off on it. And they wouldn't be there, I don't think, if they hadn't just been swimming in dehumanizing rhetoric for years now.
Yeah, that's that social sickness I was talking about. And you know what? The thing that's supposed to protect people from that in our country is the rule of law and the way we uphold the rights of people in America. And for some unimaginable reason, even though the federal courts, appointees of both parties, even appointees of Donald Trump, are upholding those rights and upholding those laws, but the Supreme Court is saying, yeah, forget about it. Unimaginable.
Yeah, no, and we can't even say that they're all just Trump appointees on the Supreme Court, because the two most
John Roberts, is it?
Yeah, the two most radical members of the court were appointed by Bush 1 and 2.
Oh man, that Al Gore won that election. Anyway, you picked on another one of his major appointments that I want to get to before we run out of time, because a different kind of danger faces the country in Bobby Kennedy.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to keep people's attention focused on that too, and I recognize that's really tough in this day and age when we are facing so many different threats. But in a lot of ways, Robert Kennedy might be the most dangerous member of the administration, at least right now.
Yes, because you can stay alive in an autocracy. People, manage to stay healthy and alive in China and in Saudi Arabia and in Russia. But Kennedy might actually kill people. He's certainly going to make it so that parents have to watch their children die, which is just so appalling.
Yeah, just 2 days ago, I went to the pharmacy to get a COVID shot, right? And I live in Pennsylvania, and supposedly the state of Pennsylvania came in and swooped in and on a state level said that the shot should be available to everybody, even though under Kennedy's direction, the FDA and CDC are not have said it's only for people 65 and up or with underlying conditions, right?
Yep.
But, so in theory, I should have been able to walk into a pharmacy and get a COVID shot. Nope. They said you have to have an underlying condition. Well, luckily I do. I'm asthmatic. Well, this is the first time I've said, luckily I have asthma,
Right.
So they didn't, and I think that the pharmacists are like willing to take, I occasionally get the hiccups as an underlying condition because most pharmacists understand this is BS, right? But like, it was frustrating because Kennedy, he went in front of the Senate and he lied. He said that everyone can get the COVID shot, that it's not harder. And that was a lie. I got it, but I do have asthma. So, but if I hadn't had asthma, if I hadn't had that to like lean on, they would have said no to me, which is to say I wouldn't have been able to get the shot. So that's a lie. He was lying. Like there are people being turned away for COVID shots. We know this, and it's his fault. And COVID, while it was obviously not as deadly as it was before, that most people have built up some amount of immunity to it, it's still pretty bad. And more importantly, I'm not going to die of COVID if I get it, but what if I pass it on to somebody who's fragile or, who's elderly? Like, it's still going to kill people. And I think it's very important that those of us who are willing to get the shots still get the shots, because everyone who gets the shot is somebody who is less likely to spread this disease. It is still
and doesn't give the virus a place to harbor and to mutate, which is why it's so important to do this, and why what he's doing is going to get polio back in the world. And we saw it with measles. I mean, for gosh sakes, these are things we thought we are done with things like polio, and he's going to bring them back.
Yeah. And I think it's frustrating because it's clear to me that RFK thinks of disease as like this kind of cleansing thing. He's got a very eugenics-minded mindset, right? He always is. He's careful to come right out and say it, but he speaks around it in this way that if you listen to him long enough, and unfortunately I have, you begin to realize he sort of thinks of disabled people and, people with health conditions and definitely children with autism, which is just very disturbing, as a drag on the human race, that we'd all just be better off without them. And he just kind of sees disease as like a way to do that and keep his hands clean, right? And first of all, that's not how any of this works. And second of all, that's deeply inhumane. And it's very frustrating because it's on so many levels. I mean, it's deeply inhumane. It's childish in a certain way. It's not how any of this works. Like, for instance, when I was a kid, my asthma was very severe, and something like COVID absolutely could have killed me.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And now I'm an adult, and I'm very healthy because I outgrew it to a certain degree. When you have childhood asthma, as you become an adult, it just doesn't hurt you as badly. And he's basically saying that the human race would be better off without me. And it's like, well, first of all, even if I was still somewhat disabled by this disease, that's not true. That's a vile and terrible thing to think. And second of all, I am a perfectly healthy person. And so even his sort of model of how health works doesn't make any sense,
No, it makes no sense. I mean, there are Republicans now, I heard one this morning, talking about maybe we should euthanize the homeless.
Yes, that was Ryan Kilmeade on Fox News.
Right? I mean, euthanize the homeless like they euthanized the Jews in Europe 100 years ago. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and
That's
again, it's treating...
Right? Where is the right wing to say that is I mean, don't you dare put on your "I believe in God" card when you're starting to talk about getting rid of human beings like that. Don't you dare.
Yeah, and what's funny is all these people will be the first to say that they're Christians and that they believe that somebody can turn their life around and be forgiven and turn over a new leaf and become a different person. And yet they talk about things like being sick or being homeless as permanent in unalterable conditions of the human experience. If you have these things happen to you, then that's just who you are. You're never going to be a contributing member of society, so you might as well be dead. That's kind of what Brian Kilmeade was getting at. And that's just not true. Like, first of all, homeless people deserve our sympathy because they're human beings. Second of all, a lot of people fall into homelessness and then get back out.
Absolutely right.
They get help.
But third of all, even if they aren't, where is your humanity?
Yeah.
Where is your humanity? Yeah. Well, we've run out of time. I can't believe it because there are like a million other things that I would love to talk to you about. I'd love to get your take on the genius foreign policy of this government. I mean, we could just go right through that cabinet. I mean, boy, the Secretary of Education, talk about in over her head. I mean, so let's do it again.
Yeah, no, I always love being on your show.
Thank you. Tell everybody where to find your great stuff and what's coming up.
So I write at salon.com a few times a week. I also have a YouTube show called Standing Room Only that's at Salon TV. It's a great time. It's relatively new. We're about 17 episodes in, so I recommend people check it out.
I do too. It's fun. All right. We'll talk again soon. Thank you so much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, everybody. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, Jill Wine-Banks is joining us.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Welcome back. I'm joined by my friend, the incomparable Jill Wine-Banks. You know her. You know her from her long career fighting corruption and fighting for justice in the law. She was a big part of the Watergate investigations. She was the general counsel to the Army, and she explains the law to everybody on MSNBC. I can go on forever about Jill, but she joins us from time to time and help us make sense of the world. Hi, Jill.
Hi, Edwin. It is so nice to be with you as the news is crashing down around us in so many different ways.
Isn't it? Well, so you and I usually talk law most of the time, but let's talk about journalism for a second, because it was an entire failure this week. But I just focus for a minute on CBS. They're agreeing to a government monitor in their newsroom, and now they're going to have probably someone running it who thinks universities are the reason that America's been radicalized, not, and universities are the main source of censorship, even though, let's see, every university I know let Mr. Kirk come and speak on campus. What's going on with CBS and what's going on with journalism?
Well, it seems to me that what's going on at CBS in particular is that they caved and bent the knee to Donald Trump. They wanted a merger, so they did some really terrible things in terms of 60 Minutes, for example, in terms of other shows, and they are paying the price now for that because Donald Trump says you're not covering the news the way I want you to. And so we need to have someone in place who will get you to say the things that we want you to say. No one should be listening to CBS anymore. No one should pay any attention to what they say because they cannot be trusted. That is a shame.
They can be trusted to do what Donald Trump and his government want them to do. They are, for our country, what TASS was in the Soviet days. Now an arm of it. It's just a disgrace. Yep.
It is. They are now the same as Fox News. And so there's no point. I remember back in the Watergate days, there were 3 networks. NBC, CBS, and ABC. They all had the same facts. They might have different opinions that were clearly labeled as opinions, but they had the same facts. We aren't in that era anymore. If you can't believe the facts, then how can you make rational judgments about who you should vote for? For example, a very important role for citizens. So it's a really disgraceful situation that we don't believe what we see with our own eyes. And, nowadays, Donald Trump says what you're supposed to believe, and people believe it. I don't. I double-check everything to make sure that it is what really happened. You just have to go to some sources that you can trust.
Well, they're not our government anymore. I mean, so after Charlie Kirk is shot, the FBI, which we all had a lot of respect for as a law enforcement agency, even if sometimes they did things that were we didn't like. They were a talented law enforcement agency. This time, they announced they've got the killer. No, wait, we don't have the killer. Somebody from ATF sends out a preliminary report saying it's a trans problem. None of that's true. The FBI flies people all over the country to stand at a press conference and do nothing. And in the end, they go to a press conference and all they can say is, thank you, God, and Donald Trump. But they didn't help solve this problem, right? The guy's family turned him in. So, how quickly has the FBI been destroyed? And that's the one we see. We got a chance to see them. Okay, we need this agency. Oops, it cannot do the job. Should we assume that every agency of the government has been gutted and now is as poorly performing as the FBI?
I don't think we have to assume it. We can see it. We can analyze it. We can use data to say that. You said in introducing this that we can't even trust the government for facts anymore. They fired the person who did the statistics for the Bureau of Labor Statistics because they didn't like the truth. And so they hired someone else. And unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, the facts are even worse than the first one who was fired reported. So you're absolutely right. But, let's focus on the FBI for now because that is a really important thing. Right now, first of all, no one at the leadership level of the FBI should have been talking about this, not only because it could hurt the prosecution going forward if information is put out too soon. Secondly, because people on the ground know the facts, not the people at the top. That's the same thing that happened with Todd Blanche doing an interview for show of Ghislaine Maxwell. He didn't know the facts. He couldn't push back. He couldn't cross-examine her. He was giving her leading questions that would help his client, Donald Trump. That's wrong. But in this case, information was put out that turned out not to be true, that shouldn't have been put out at all, even if it had been true. Now, I'm not willing to throw away all of the FBI right now. They did put together with local law enforcement, and at this point I can't say, for example, the video that was put out that may have led Tyler's family to recognize him and call and say, I think that the person in that video is my relative, and to cooperate to get him to turn himself in, which might not have happened without the video. And I don't know what role the FBI played. So let's say they may have done something right. They certainly did a lot of things wrong. And this is not an FBI case. It is probably going to be a state murder charge.
Correct.
There's very little federal crimes, none of which would be death penalty eligible. Now, I'm personally not a believer in the death penalty, even in a case like this. But that's the kind of case you want to be charged for a lot of reasons, even if you don't impose the death penalty. And the federal crimes would not be death penalty eligible. So if you're a believer, you want it to be a state prosecution. And murder is certainly a more serious charge than a weapons charge. And I don't think that there is a civil rights charge, but I can see that they are pushing for a charge of hate crime based on religion. That's what they're now sort of saying, is that it's based on his religion that he was targeted. We don't know that now.
We don't know anything.
The transgender thing that you mentioned, I noticed that a lot of reporters are referring to Tyler as a they, not he. I haven't seen any evidence that he is trans or gay or anything other than a cisgender male.
Yep.
And I don't care one way or the other. He clearly was a good shot, assuming that the evidence of showing someone running off the roof from which the bullets were recovered is him. We don't know that for sure.
What about the this lawsuit? Kash Patel told the world when he was sworn in that he absolutely would be protecting FBI agents against any campaign of retribution, right? And now we have this lawsuit where they've come with the receipts and they can show that in fact, they're being asked, who'd you vote for? When did you decide to love Donald Trump? Wait a minute, that wasn't soon enough, you're fired.
Yeah. I would say that this is a very good evidence of how ineffective Senate confirmation is.
Yeah.
They all, and this is one where you can broaden it to every single cabinet level or Senate confirmed level, which includes this. It's not a cabinet position, but it is Senate confirmed. How ineffective it is, because people say, at the Supreme Court, I would follow precedent until they don't, and they reverse Roe versus Wade and create presidential immunity that should never have existed. And so this is a general problem of Senate confirmation. And even when people do ridiculous things in the Senate confirmation hearings, they ignore it. And just like they did in impeachment. They voted not guilty, not non-impeachable. The words they had to speak were not guilty for Donald Trump when he clearly was guilty. So
Joe,
of the Senate.
I think it's a partisan problem, not a structural problem. I think the Republican Party has decided the world doesn't matter as much as they stay in charge, because everybody knew who Kash Patel was. Everybody knew who Bobby Kennedy was, and everybody knew what problems they would cause, and in fact, they have done it. But the Republicans said, we are going to follow Donald Trump, even if it takes America down the drain. I'm not sure you can blame that on the confirmation process. The confirmation process, we knew. They knew. They just didn't care.
And the same thing is true for voters. Donald Trump had more votes than Kamala Harris. He won the election. And that's because people ignored what was in front of their face. They didn't care. I don't know why he has this appeal. To me, he is revolting and not appealing. But obviously he has something that is appealing to more people than not. So he got elected. And it is the voters' responsibility to change that in 26. If they don't like what's happening now, if they can get their heads together to say, I see what's happening and it's hurting me. I mean, if you bought anything recently,
coffee, it's unbelible. Coffee.
It is.
It's going through the roof.
I ordered a pair of glasses online, and they are like 40% more today than they were a year ago. And in catalogs that I get for clothing, they're at least 30% more now than they were the last time I got a catalog.
Joe, Americans do see this, and they are going to vote. But, the Republicans are doing their best to make sure those votes don't matter. I mean, John Roberts closed the door to the courts on gerrymandering. and look what's happening. They're just saying, you know what, if we can fix this, and we're going to need to win 60% of the vote in order to win, and maybe we will, but that is not a democracy.
It's going to be hard. Once they said, partisan gerrymandering's okay, you can't do racial, but you can make it Republican-led, that's okay. It's going to be a serious problem, and they control more states in terms of the governor and the legislature, so that they will be able to do it more than the Democrats can.
Yeah, and it's just people are putting their party ahead of their country all the time now. Something that did not happen when you were doing Watergate. It's really hideous.
If we could go back to one of your questions about, the confirmation of Patel.
Yeah.
All of these people, Don Bongino, what qualifications does he have? And he is theoretically the person running the day-to-day operations of the FBI. Why is he qualified to do that? He is not. There's just no way that he is. He should not be in that position.
Nope. And everybody who voted for him knows it, and we have to hold them all accountable. And then there's John Roberts, who for years he was happy to be known as an institutionalist. He's there to protect the institution of the courts, but that's just BS. I mean, in this latest round, the court is attacking the rest of the federal judiciary. They're overturning their, carefully constructed decisions by Republicans and Democrats without so much as an explanation, leaving everyone, including all those judges, confused about what the law is. You'd think they would not want to be confused about what the law is. Amy Coney Barrett says, just read the decision. Great, but they're not even giving us decisions. Right. They're saying to the world on every case that involves Trump, leave it alone. It's ours alone to decide. We're going to say, you know what? No, you can't stay anything. Someday we'll judge it on the merits. But for now, it's our decision. Don't get in the way. I mean, I can't think of anything more arrogant and more destructive.
It's worse than that. If you look at the cases this week in the Supreme Court, you have cases that say racial profiling is okay to round up people on immigration raids.
Right, but illegal on a college campus where you're trying to have a balanced school. Yeah.
Right. You can't use it for admission to college to make up for past discrimination. And by the way, he gets full power. If he wants to fire someone from the Federal Trade Commission who can't be fired except for cause, it's okay. We'll let her be fired while we debate this. In the meantime, she will be replaced. She will be out of job. Someone else will be there. The registrar of copyright. Oh, well, that's actually a legislative branch. He doesn't have control of the legislative branch. But there you go. And foreign aid, even though it's allocated and approved by the Senate and the House, which has the power of the purse, it's the legislative branch, not him. Oh, well, yeah, he can withhold it. And, I mean, it's just really impossible. And all these justices who claim to be textualists are ignoring the text of laws, and they're not textualists anymore. So it's really scary to predict anything, because the shadow docket where all these cases are being decided does not even require that there be an explanation for how they rule. And we don't know, and lower courts can't follow the ruling because they don't know.
They don't know because the court is not, in many of these cases, they're not saying the underlying law changes. They're not saying, we've changed our mind on racial profiling. They're saying, we're not stopping Donald Trump. He may be breaking the law. We'll decide that later. But right now, we are not going to stop him. We are helpless to stop him.
Exactly.
And they're saying that about everything. He may be breaking the law. There's nothing. Yeah.
When you say he may be breaking the law, lower courts have consistently ruled that he is breaking the law.
That's
that
correct.
And they have said, no, we are not going to allow this to go into effect until it's unlawful, it's unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court is saying, I don't respect anything in the lower court, whether it's the district court or whether it's the Court of Appeals. We're going to allow this. That's really a threat to democracy and justice.
I don't think we've ever had this. I don't think I'm unaware of anything even remotely like this. Just saying, it's really unconscionable and unprecedented. I know we use that word so much that it has no meaning anymore, but it should. These things they're going to hurt us as a democracy. Edwin, I am now feeling like I live in 1939 in Germany, and except that it's happening faster than it happened in Germany. There was a gradual loss of rights. Here it's happening. This is only, what are we in, the 8th or 9th month of his second term? Yes.
And this all happened. He has 3+ more years, and everything that was in Project 2025 that we thought was appalling is going to happen. And now they're talking about taking away my right to vote as a woman because, one, if I do get to vote, it will be less valuable than a woman who has children because they are more valuable to society. And they're saying that all women should stay at home and take care of their children or grandchildren, that they shouldn't be working. I mean, what is going on here? That is not America.
Joe, one of their state legislators or congressmen, one of these Republicans said yesterday that we should euthanize homeless people. I mean, if that doesn't sound like the 1930s in Europe to you, I don't know.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. They have no moral compass at all, and they're dangerous.
I mean, the fact that they think it is bad enough, but that someone would say it out loud.
Said it on TV.
Oh, God. And Matthew Dowd gets fired. Charlie Kirk stood for a lot of horrible policies, but he was willing to debate them. And I am old enough that I remember when it was Buckley and Gore Vidal who debated I can't remember the name of their show, but it made you smarter because you heard rational arguments. Now we don't have rational arguments. And, I really wish we could go back to a time when everybody agreed on the facts and when we debated them and when there was bipartisan compromise. Compromise is not a dirty word. We need to go back to those times. And I also worry about young people. I used to do a podcast called iGen Politics with Victor Shi, who is he's an old soul because we mostly agreed. But the idea was to bring together the viewpoint of when we started, he was 17 and I was like 60 years older than him. And that's what we need more of is discussion between differing viewpoints between older and younger. And we need the young people to be involved, but to be educated, to have the facts and to question whether something is AI created. I just did some checking because I now suspect everything of being AI generated. And there was some discussion about the things that were inscribed on the bullets by the shooter. And the fact that they are memes of TikTok. So I don't understand them because I'm too old to follow that. But so are most of the people on television who are explaining this who don't know what they mean. And someone said, it's like asking someone to explain the Wu-Tang lyrics to Bing Crosby. And then there was a follow-up that said, well, Bing Crosby might have understood. He worked with David Bowie. And I thought, oh, that's not true. And I checked it out, and they did do a song together that made me cry because it talks about peace and how in the future we might have peace. I encourage everyone listening to look up David Bowie, Bing Crosby singing Christmas Carol. It brought tears to my eyes, and it was true.
I'm going to do that as soon as I'm off the air. Yeah.
Do it. Really, it will make you cry. It was beautiful and it was real. It isn't AI generated. They did a show in 1977. So there you go.
So Joe, despite all this, we aren't helpless. And I think you and I are both from Chicago and proud of it. And our city did the right thing. It wasn't just the governor who did a great job and the mayor who said they're not coming here, but all over the city, people got organized. They protested peacefully. They figured out how to create networks of journalists and citizens to take pictures and follow. And Donald Trump said, 4 days after saying, we're going to teach Chicago why we call it the War Department, said, yeah, I'm going to Memphis instead. We kept it. The ICE people are here and they're doing their terrible thing, and they've already killed one person here. But we've proven he can be stopped. So I hope everybody learns that lesson.
Oh, I do too. And I also, something you mentioned, I have to praise. You and Joan Esposito did a fantastic job of bringing together local reporters, local media, into a look at what's happening to journalism. It was a fantastic program that I really learned a lot and enjoyed. So thank you to you and Joan for having put that together and making me smarter for it. It's important that we maintain local news sources and get the facts on the ground. And I have been following what's happening in Broadview at the ICE Detention Center, which has been boarded up so that journalists and people just protesting cannot see inside. They see buses going in and no one coming out, but they can't see what happens inside. And people on the ground are reporting that relatives are showing up and they are being told, they're being transferred, we can't tell you where, and we won't give you their case number. And I also want to point out that it is a fire hazard, that it has windows all boarded up now. People, if there was a tragedy inside, if there was a fire, a lot of people are going to die. And I think that it's clearly a violation of local fire rules. But the fire department has said, well, it's a federal building, we have no jurisdiction. That's not an excuse for the federal government to put people's lives in danger, including their own employees. It's not just the detained people. It is everyone who's in that building. So I'm really worked up about this and think that we need to make sure that something happens and that fire laws are obeyed.
Yeah, I wonder if a state can condemn it or the city can condemn it, even if it's a federal building. Yeah, I don't know the law on that. So. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't you think the federal government should care enough to do something about it? I think no, not this government. I don't. But Joe, I am at the civil disobedience part of my life, and if I were the mayor of the surrounding community, I would say, I know it's expensive. I know taxpayers paid for these roads, but for the good of everybody, I'm just going to do what Rich Daley did to the airport at Meigs Field. I'm going to plow up the roads all around this facility so they can't come in and out anymore. Because as long as you're willing to take the consequences.
Yes, let's be creative.
Well, I think that our mayor and our governor have been creative in being forceful and saying, we don't want you. And he went away. The bully went away. So Memphis the governor is Republican and is welcoming him. The mayor, not so much, but is not seeing a way out, although I don't know why. It is his city. And, Mayor Johnson here
I think he's afraid.
No, you're not coming. Yep. Yeah. And they passed the
Chicagoans help. Yeah, Chicagoans help. It helps to have a city that's organized and strong and willing to defend itself, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm very proud of Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker, very proud to be a Chicagoan and to have the benefit of the protections that we enjoy and the freedom to elect the people we want to elect. and that represent us well in Congress.
Yeah, well, that's going to be our last word for this time, Jill. Thank you, as always. Really appreciate the time you spend with me and with my community here online.
Great. Thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it and love listening to you every week. So thank you very much.
Talk to you soon, Jill. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Edwin. Bye-bye.
Yep. All right, everybody. That was the spectacular Jill Wine-Banks. And, I have a real treat coming up for you after the break. A remarkable economist, somebody who served on the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So stay tuned. We'll be back right after the news.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And I am thrilled to be joined by Claudia. I'm having trouble talking today, which is really not a good thing on the radio. I apologize. Economist Claudia Sep. She served on the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors for more than a decade. She was senior economist at the Council of Economic Advisors during the Obama administration. She even has a technical rule named after her. Now she's the chief economist at New Century Advisors and the founder of her own consulting company. In every role she's had, she's been dedicated to helping all of us non-economists better understand the forces we face and the policy choices our government is called upon to make, which, right now it's pretty important. Claudia, thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, before we get into, niche-y topics like what actually is the Fed and why its independence matters, can we just zoom out for a minute? I want to get your sense of the way this administration and Congress, through the beautiful bill and other executive orders, has or has not reshaped America's economy. What's their impact on the direction of the economy? Will it make us, could it make us more prosperous? Is it just going to exacerbate the wealth gap? We hear from a lot of people, and I have my own views on it, but I've never talked to somebody who has your view on it.
Right. So, while it may be hard to believe, we are only in the early innings of the second term of the Trump administration, and we've had some really big policy changes put in place, and it is far too soon to know how they're going to play out. But I will say, just to highlight a few, the widespread increase in tariffs, those are policies in the breadth and the magnitude that this administration is pursuing them, we have not seen in living memory. So tariffs used to be a key part of taxes in the United States back at our founding. They have not been a tax that we have used so aggressively in many years, and there are good reasons for that. First of all, they are a tax, and they're a very regressive tax in that they hit people with the hardest. And so it's just not a tax we've used, but they're being used broadly. And that's not just about reshaping what American consumers face when they go to pay for stuff, but it has the potential to really reshape our trading arrangements. And these could have big impacts, but again, it's very early in terms of seeing what the tariffs are going to do to the U.S. economy and the global economy. That's a big change. Another big change that maybe doesn't get talked about as much in terms of the economics, but we've had some really big changes in immigration policy. In terms of we'd had a large surge in immigration into the country, and whatever, setting aside the social issues, the legal issues, like that did a lot to give a boost to the economy and especially workforce. And now we're pushing that in reverse, and immigration has really, come to a standstill, and that again can have effects on local labor markets. It can have effects on the prices of goods and services. So we're watching that. And then you mentioned one big beautiful bill, so that is a piece, and we're going to see the effects of that probably coming more next year and the years after. Like that hasn't really taken as effect as much. But the last thing I would point to that to me I've been watching very closely is the administration has really grabbed onto as much executive control as they can, right? So tariffs are something historically that came through Congress. The president does have some authorities for tariffs, but they've really been exuberant in grabbing those tariff authorities. And we've just seen a lot of moving very quickly, and I know we'll talk more about the Fed in a little while too, but just expanding that realm of influence to parts of the economy that haven't been as strongly controlled by the president. So how that plays out, I think, is something to watch very closely, and it is something distinctive about this administration.
That expansion of executive power has gone beyond government to strong-arming private companies to give shares to the government ownership of private companies like Intel, like U.S. Steel. Although, Claudia, I don't actually understand that. Who exercises the votes of those shares? I have no idea how that actually would work.
Right. Well, and we don't know yet. Right. That's where it also is. It's not just the executive, the president gaining more control or getting. We haven't done this recently. So exactly what are the rules of the game? And for a lot of the negotiations with the tariffs, some of the discussions with countries, a lot of these are just their agreements. They're true social like they're not written down and formal in the way that we're kind of used to agreements. So I think there's been a lot of questions raised, and that's why I said we're in the early innings. We're going to have to see how this plays out. The United States government holding a share of Intel, as we've done investments that went Intel, like that could play out in a way that makes sense, isn't that disruptive, doesn't change, Intel's behavior, doesn't really hurt the market, or it could be done in a way that's really destructive, and particularly if it spreads to other companies. And we just don't know yet. Like there's just a lot of experiments being run.
I'm not, again, this isn't my field, but people in your field have told me my whole life that uncertainty is bad for investments, bad for economic growth, very confusing to people when they're trying to figure out how to allocate capital. And it seems like everything that we've talked about has increased uncertainty.
It has. And that's certainly in the spring. I was very concerned. Like things were moving very fast. There was lots of uncertainty. That's part of a risk. We weren't concerned about we could just careen off into a recession. That people just kind of, it's too much. It's overwhelming. Everything just stops. What's been remarkable is thus far as American businesses, consumers, they're pushing through it. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I do think the uncertainty acts like a tax, and I think we lost opportunities because people are business are being more cautious and not hiring as much, not doing the same investment. So I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it is the amount of uncertainty that has been created, and we just keep pushing through. As the economy is still moving along. It is slowing down, and I think part of that is the uncertainty. And again, it's not. I don't want to praise it, but this is probably the new normal for this administration, is just a lot of uncertainty. We're going to keep guessing as we go along. And at the end of the day, businesses, they do have to make a decision. Families have got to make a decision.
Right or wrong, they got to make a decision. So I don't understand. Let's talk about the Fed, because I don't often talk to Fed governors. And it has this dual mandate, so you should explain that, and then we'll talk about its independence. But there are other issues that I want to ask about the Fed. So first, just tell everybody really what it is, why it's independent, and what that dual mandate really is.
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll say I was an economist at the Fed. I never made it up to those governor levels, but I certainly answered their questions and did the work. Yep. No. Hey, I'd love to have that promotion someday. Not yet. The Fed, one of the things that I find frustrating as someone who's worked there and, kind of out in the world now is it tends to be like something of a mystery. Like it's an institution. It doesn't talk a lot. When it does, it's not very technical, like a lot about markets and, but it is a really important institution in that, and the Fed does a lot of things. It was created to make sure whenever we have a banking crisis that it's the government that steps in. It's not private banks that figure it out, so that's its long history. But over time, much of, a key function for the Fed is to do called monetary policy. And just boiling it down, it's about interest rates. And the Fed, their interest rate, the policy rate they have, the federal funds rate, it's the interest rate that banks borrow from each other. So it's a very short-term rate. It's not what any of us can have, but the Fed's interest rate affects all kinds of interest rates, longer-term interest rates, ones for mortgages or business loans or credit cards. So while the Fed doesn't control all the interest rates, they have an influence. And if interest rates are lower, it can help give the economy some lift. And if the economy is running too hard, inflation's starting to creep up, then you can raise interest rates and kind of cool it down. So the Fed is there to try to balance things out because, we talk about uncertainty causing people a lot of stress. Well, volatility, like the ups and the downs, like that also is really hard. So the Fed's there to kind of smooth things out. Now, this is, they have interest rates as a tool. Congress has a lot of tools. The Fed's got one tool as interest rates. It is a powerful tool.
Hang on. I'm going to interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
Who decides how much money the government prints? Is that also the Fed?
Well, in the operation, it is tied into that. But I think it's easiest to think about in terms of interest rates. But yeah, you can
right.
Moving the money supply around is kind of in the same. But it is the case that yes, this is very much tied together. And so then the arrangement, and there's been a lot of talk in the news about Fed independence and this big concept and why this is important and the president is under attack and, what is going on. And really what Fed independence boils down to is who's in charge of those interest rates? Is it politicians like the president or is it a group of technocrats? Or, non-political experts who are put in place to make the decision. And in the United States, and this is true in our peer countries, experience over many decades has shown that if politicians are in charge of interest rates, they tend to, it gets into the politics, the election cycles. Like, let's run the economy really hot right before an election to get elected. And then inflation goes out of control afterwards, right? So, it's not just a U.S. thing. It's, this has been the experience. And so over time, this idea of Fed independence is the idea that the individuals who make those day-to-day decisions about what should that interest rate be, they're not politicians. At the Fed governors are nominated by the president. They're Senate confirmed. So there is accountability, because, again, they're making important decisions. But they're protected in that once they're put in place, they can't be removed by the president for, they don't serve at the pleasure of the president. There has to be a for cause, a reason. So they're protected, and the Fed has its own budget. That's the whole, they can print money. They need to make, so Congress can't cut them off either. So they're protected from these day-to-day, hey, you've got to lower interest rates because the election is next year. The Fed can say, no, it's not the right time to do that. So that's the arrangement. And it's not that, it's not a perfect system. And it is, you have individuals who are not elected who have a lot of power over, or a lot of influence over the economy. And over time, Congress created the Fed. They've changed the Federal Reserve Act over time. It can be amended. But what we have seen in this administration is the president has, verbally told the Fed, hey, you need to lower interest rates a lot, like 3 percentage points. And, it went from words and, threatening to fire the Fed chair, Jay Powell, and about the building. So there were a lot of words exchanged, a lot of threats. And then last month, the president tried to remove one of the Fed governors. And that's still tied up in a lawsuit. But you can see how it's when people get all exercised about Fed independence as a threat, because if the president gets to remove people and put in his team, well, I can tell you where interest rates are going. And unfortunately, I can tell you where inflation is going to.
So short-term rates will go down. I don't know. Will long-term rates go down? No, I don't know. Actually. I mean, the Fed really, as you say, has if they get out of whack with what the economy's actually doing, weird stuff will happen.
This is true. However, the Fed, the typical monetary policy, federal funds rate, like the decision they're going to make this coming week, that's all about very short-term interest rates. But the Fed has other tools, asset purchases, and they have other tools that can affect long-term interest rates. And it is the case that during World War II, the Fed was in direct coordination with the White House, with Treasury, because when the United States was at war and the Fed agreed to help keep the federal government borrowing costs low because of the war. So the Fed is capable of pushing down lots of interest rates. And like I said, in the war, there was a reason but that is not the typical setup. And yes, it's another one of these, once the White House gains more control than is the usual, then really all bets are off on what happens next in terms of interest rates go low, how aggressive are they? And it's not like inflation will necessarily, pop up right away, but you push the economy really hard, you are all likelihood going to see some more inflation, and financial markets will have a rough time because they look out in the future.
I'm feeling inflation right now, and I think it's tariff driven. Mm-hmm. But like I said, I bought coffee. Coffee is much more expensive than it was just a little while ago. So we're seeing the tariffs place upward pressure on prices. And then while the economy may be softening, it's hard to know, and you correct me about this, but the labor market, when you say, we're going to get rid of immigrants out of the labor market at the same time that the entire baby boom generation is retiring, you shrink the labor market, or the supply of people who are working. I don't know what to call that. They all have impacts that I don't know, feel like inflation to me.
Right. Well, a few things. One, the Fed right now is still business as usual. Right. I mean, there's a lot going on around them, but in terms of they're still independent. They're still going to make a decision this week based on the data. And the way they're approaching this very much mirrors many of the things you said, in that they're going to be cautious. Inflation has been above where the Fed wants to see it since 2021, right? So we've had we do not have the inflation problem now that we had in 2022, but every year that inflation is higher, it adds up in terms of the level of prices keep going up. So it's very clear, and it is so clear, looking at, surveys of Americans or interviews, inflation is still a problem.
We care about it.
The higher prices are a problem. So they're aware of that, and then knowing, well, if you have, if labor force growth is slow because of immigration, well, then you can't push that economy as much because there aren't as many workers. It's going to create inflation. So they're discussing cutting interest rates by a 0.25 percentage point, maybe 0.5 percentage point, trying to get ahead of, because there are some dynamics in the labor market that are disconcerting. Job growth has really fallen off, and people who don't have jobs and are looking for jobs, they have a very rough time right now. And you don't want to recessions. Labor markets have a way of, they start building up like the snowball going down the mountain, and they kind of build up momentum, and then it really gets going, and then you have a recession. And the Fed wants to avoid that. So they're like, it's time to ease up some on interest rates, but in a cautious way. Very different from the president, who's been on them about, you need to cut interest rates by 3 percentage points. Right? That's not the way, because they're going to try. It might be that they'll eventually end up at a much lower interest rate. But because of all the uncertainty that's out there, because of the different policies, and then just trying to figure out exactly what does the economy need to keep as balanced as possible, they're going to start out cutting, but they're going to be more cautious.
So I just want to understand, because I want to understand, if I understand you correctly, despite Americans' concern about inflation and our feeling inflation, the Fed likely looks at the same data and says, we see that inflation, but we also see a recession in the making. from data on the labor market, and that worries us more.
Right. So Congress gave the Fed a dual mandate. So they said maximum employment and stable prices. Okay, so they've got the two things they need to think about, and we are in a moment that's really the most challenging moment that the Fed faces, where their dual mandate is in tension. We've seen job growth slow pretty sharply. There might be immigration, but it also is probably some demand, and the Fed is concerned that this could get out of hand. Like, we could end up with a recession. And in a recession, we've seen the unemployment rate rise a tenth the last few months, and it's at 4.3%, which is historically quite low. In a recession, the mildest of recessions, the unemployment rate goes up by 2 percentage points. And it doesn't just hurt the people who are unemployed. Wage growth is bad. Everybody. You don't have career opportunities. So they're like, okay, that's the risk that they see, is that things go, you get to a recession. And then on the inflation side, okay, so inflation is running closer to 3% than 2%. 2% is what the Fed is kind of like, that's where they, think that's a good place in terms of keeping the economy balanced. And so with the tariffs, the tariffs have interrupted the progress. We were making slow, painful progress back to 2%, but the tariffs have created some upward push, particularly in goods prices. But so far, businesses have held on to some of those costs. But, we know where those are going, right? They are eventually going to make their way to consumers. It's been kind of a drawn-out process. So then what the Fed looks at is like, okay, we're going to be closer to 3% on inflation this year, maybe into next year. But they think that'll work its way through and then, get back to normal. So what the Fed is doing is they're trying to balance these two bad outcomes. The recession where, employment really falls off, or with inflation, maybe we get stuck at 3%. Right, like we've just been higher for long, So it's not that like the labor market's more important than inflation. Like for the Fed, the Congress tells them these are co-equal. You've got these two jobs. They're just trying to balance out like which of these two is the bigger problem right now. Because if it's employment, they should be cutting. Yeah. If it's inflation, they should hold or raise. And it really, it's a value. It's subjective. They're running models, they're looking at data, but no, they don't have a crystal ball. No, so they're trying to weigh out these two. But it's tricky, and you could make a case. And I think this week whether it's all official dissents, there's a lot of division on the Federal Open Market Committee. There's 12 voting members as to what's the right thing to do, because you can tell the story either way. Like, I think there are a lot of reasons to be concerned that inflation's gotten stuck. And it's clear that people are unhappy.
The experience of 3% a year inflation that's compound interest. It's 3% and then it's 3% more the next year. What did Einstein say? That was like the most powerful force in the world, was compound interest, right? Yeah. People will feel that very quickly and will be very angry. But are we, when I was young, there was this thing we called stagflation. Is that the thing that's haunting all of us, that we might end up with inflation and recession like in the 1970s?
Yes, except the magnitudes here are probably less. I've sometimes referred to it as stagflation light, not to make light of it, but these aren't. But it's that logic of slower growth, fewer jobs, higher unemployment, and inflation that's higher. And back to we talked about Fed independence and the attacks on it, and we could have like full on stagflation if the Fed loses the reins. And like right now, the tariffs, what we're looking at in terms of inflationary, like the boost to inflation, we're talking 3%, maybe peaking at 4%. That would even be large for what's happening. that like the 1970s were worse,
brutal
in that
much
regard.
Worse. Yeah.
And that's not, and I think, this is a testament, like, there's the U.S. economy is very different than it was in the 1970s. We're not as exposed to oil prices moving around. Like, there's things structured about the economy that are better. And frankly, the policy making, we've learned a thing or two. So I don't see that as the scenario, and yet I do want to flag, like, the Fed itself is a risk right now to inflation. Like, if it becomes a political institution, and like, you could have things could go off the rails. So I don't want to say we're not going to see those kind of, but that's not the setup right now. But the logic of it, and in terms of how people will feel about it, it's in that ballpark.
Yeah,
things are slowing down, but inflation is still high. And the inflation has been higher for, several years now.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you a completely different kind of question.
Okay.
After the calamity, 2006, 8, I can't remember. The Fed stepped in dramatically, increased the balance sheet enormously through what I guess was they called quantitative easing, which I don't know what that means. I heard the words. Whatever happened back then, has the Fed worked through that and or are the decisions they made then still, is their balance sheet still impacted? Does that mean they have less freedom than they otherwise might have as we come into this moment?
Right. Well, the Fed's balance sheet, so the asset is whole, there's no limit. I mean, it is technically kind of like the U.S. debt. There's no limit. We can start having bad things happen in markets, but they can do what they need to do. It is true that the Fed's balance sheet is much larger now than it was before the global financial crisis in 2008.
Yep. Has it started to come down in the last few years, or has it stayed where it was?
Yes. No. Even after in recent years, they have been doing what's called quantitative tightening. So that's when they're like running off the balance sheet. So it has come down from the peak after the pandemic. Because again, they did another big. There were asset purchases made by the Fed after the global financial crisis. There were asset purchases made by the Fed during the pandemic. So we've had in two crises now, we've seen the Fed go in. And in fact, Secretary Bessent had a critique opinion piece on the Fed recently and was really scolding the Fed about their balance sheet. And the one thing I'll say is the reason, we talked about the Fed has control of interest rates. They use the federal funds rate. That's their policy interest rate. Well, what happened in 2008 is we went into this financial crisis, the recession. The Fed cut the federal funds rate, and then it hit zero because, the crisis was so severe and interest rates had been lower. And so then it's like, okay, now what do we do? But the economy was still in a very bad place. So the Fed went and created new tools, which were this trying to, by purchasing assets, they were pushing liquidity out into the market, trying to lower interest rates. That way, because they were demanding more treasuries, demanding more mortgage-backed securities. So it was another way for the Fed to try and influence interest rates because their federal funds rate was all tapped out. It was a zero. So it's not that the Fed it's not like Chairman Bernanke woke up one day and said, oh, I want to go buy treasuries, right? That wasn't it was the Fed trying to figure out, the interest rates need to come down more to help support the economy. What else can we do? Then they used the asset purchases. Now, it is a place where very legitimately, if the Fed is buying a bunch of U.S. treasuries and the government is issuing treasuries to pay for their big fiscal spending, you can see where the lines start to get blurred between the Fed and Congress and the White House. So it is. It's not a place where the Fed. I think the Fed would be perfectly fine with a balance sheet that looked like it did before the global financial crisis. But that's not the world we're in. So it's another tool. It's one that comes out in emergencies. But like right now, the federal funds rate is up over 4%. Even if we were to go into a recession, that's a lot of space for them to be cutting with the federal funds rate. And as long as financial markets, sometimes they have to do emergency lending if things go all haywire. But there's no reason right now why the Fed would say, oh, let's do quantitative easing. Let's buy treasuries. Like shouldn't be in the moment.
All right. I have one last line of questions for you. And I think this one won't be long. The Fed also is like in charge of the banking system in really important ways. Really important ways. So if hypothetically, if you have a corrupt president who likes to launder money, foreign as well as local, would control of the Fed be a useful thing, hypothetically?
So the Fed's got a lot of tools, and they could be misused. I will say with the banking, much of the banking regulation, the banking supervision, the Fed works in conjunction with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and Office of Comptroller of the Currency. So that is a piece that's a little more tied into, I wouldn't say politics, but those are part of the executive branch, right? So like the banking piece of what the Fed does is less cordoned off than the monetary policy, or at least it's in principle. So, and those go across different agencies, and the President Trump is in the process of choosing who will be the next Fed chair. Yes. And many of the candidates that are supposedly being interviewed, some of them have talked about a need to reform the Fed and do different things. And so I imagine we'll see some changes. Not, you weren't asking about your little more nefarious changes, but I mean, like, things could change in that space. And I think, there's definitely questions about the Fed with crypto. And I mean, this has come up with some of their banking regulations. And I think the one that's come up in some of the doomsday scenarios of a Fed that could be weaponized is that in emergencies, the Fed has used like swap lines, basically providing liquidity to other countries. Yeah. Because the Fed, not just stabilizing our economy, but has been, instrumental in stabilizing the global economy in times of crisis. Well, we've seen how the tariffs have been weaponized in a few cases, like you could argue with like Brazil, where it's a very political. So there are tools that the Fed has that are really powerful that haven't been used for political purpose. They've been used more of like we're gonna save the global economy that's blowing up. But we've seen in some contexts the administration has created emergencies, called things emergencies, and then used tools very aggressively that have only been met in emergencies, like calling the fentanyl crisis with the tariffs or the deficit. So there are some tools inside the Fed that are used in emergencies that I do worry about. Are we going to create an emergency to use a tool in a way that it wasn't intended? And some of these tools are pretty powerful.
All right. Thank you. That's frightening and something to watch for. We're out of time. I really appreciate your time and trying to explain these issues to lay people like me.
Great. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Take care. All right, everybody. That was Claudia Sam. She's the senior economist at New Century, chief economist at New Century Advisors, and more knowledgeable than I'm afraid I was able to understand about the Fed. Anyway, we're going to take a break and your calls when we come back.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
All righty, Jim, kick us off.
Edwin. No, hi, Edwin.
Yep.
I got a kick out of the slain Republican zealot being eulogized by Netanyahu. He said he was a shining example of Judeo-Christian ethics. That is an extreme. And then Bolsonaro, who was convicted for 23 years down there in Brazil, Marco Rubio's not happy with it. Because
too bad.
The 50% tariffs weren't doing enough to sway the Supreme Court of Brazil, and they would have been much happier if they would have. Apparently, the Republican Party much happier if they would have killed his political opponent and killed the Supreme Court judge. They would have. That would have satisfied him well. But what a nightmarish world we're living in. That's all I got to say. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare. And and then this arms race to gerrymander the House of Representatives is really bizarre. I mean, they're doing through Missouri. I imagine they're going down to the last state because it's not exactly.
No, it's Fort Sumter. They want to end the democracy. There's no question they don't want to share country with us, and it's terrifying. Right. And you know what? I still want to share country with them, and I hope they'll come to their senses. But as we showed them in Chicago, we will not be bullied, pushed around, and ruled. We're happy to let our government govern, but that's not the same thing as being ruled illegitimately. Anyway, Jim, thank you as always.
If I just say Franklin Park was something else. Let's put it this way: if I was stopped by those goons and I didn't have my insurance card or anything, I'd take off too. I'd take off in a minute. Anyway, have a good week. Thank you.
You bet. Dave, you're next.
Hey, Edwin. Yeah, when you're mentioning about that Fox and Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade talking about that people suffering from mental health issues who refuse help should simply be killed. Because he's trying to say that this guy, a litany of a previous arrests and all of that, diagnosed with schizophrenia, should have been taken off the streets long ago. Well, gee, how soon they forget the right were the ones that, with their St. Ronald Reagan, who put them out on the street. He shut down the mental institutions and that back in 1981. And that when he signed that Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act, effectively repealed Jimmy Carter's Mental Health Systems Act of 1980. And that led to a large number of the people with mental issues or illness being left without adequate support, contributing to a rise in homelessness and incarceration for the mentally ill.
Yeah. So,
how soon they forget, then
they don't forget. They just lie.
Yeah, and when he's asking about the being killed, what is it with this Charlie Kirk? If somebody just has a bad post or whatever, they're firing these people. Don't these people have their own First Amendment rights too?
Charlie Kirk wasn't a saint. He was very talented, and he went around and he spoke, and he had real debates, which is fair. But the things he called for, he put university professors all over the country in the crosshairs, and they suffered by being doxxed and threatened. And what happened to them didn't seem to matter to anybody on that side. They were happy just to call out people they disliked and call them enemies. And, that's why I'm with a nice Republican governor of Utah who's like, could we stop just calling everybody in America an enemy? But who's doing it, right? It comes right to the top these days. Anyway, Dave, thank you. You got a long list. I'm going to keep going. All right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a lot of people. You bet, Dave. A lot of people calling today, so forgive me if I move you along. I want to get everybody in if I can. Jeff, you're next.
Great. I think I love that she talked about stability. I think the problem with Trump, among many others, is he's making these big, broad, fast, crazy, unpredictable moves, or wants to, and our economy likes stability and our economy likes, consistency, and that's what freaks people out if they can't predict and they can't see the things coming. So I'm glad she touched on that. One thing, if you have her back or someone who is more economically versed than I am, why do economists never talk about scale? the economy today, the population today, is much larger than it was 15 or 20 years ago. So when we talk about 1% or 2% change in unemployment today, that is much larger than 1 or 2% would have been in 1990 numbers or 2000 numbers. And I never see that addressed, and I just wondered if there's somebody out there who's, taking that into consideration, or if that's just kind of like it all comes out in the wash and they don't really pay too much attention to that part of the math.
No, they do.
Anyway,
I mean,
great show.
Yep, thank you. Really appreciate it, and good points. Naomi, and I understand you're calling from California.
Yes, Santa Monica. Hi, Edwin.
Hi there.
Hi, I called you last week, and I told you I'd call you back with that information about the election anomalies that we spoke about.
Yes, I remember.
Okay, so I will tell you, and then if you have any questions, there are two people, Dr. Walter Mebane, M-E-B as in boy, A-N as in Nancy E, at the University of Michigan. He's a professor of election specialist. Mm-hmm. He studies anomalies, statistical anomalies. Mm-hmm. And he's specifically targeting Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Rockland County, New York.
Okay. And the other?
He calls it drop-off anomalies. And the other is Nathan Taylor at Election Truth Alliance. What they're doing is looking at statistical anomalies and they do statistical analyses of election anomalies or discrepancies. And they're finding them. And they're, as I said, they're trying to encourage the Democratic Party to get involved in this too.
Well, so I don't want to comment on them until I've looked at them, and I will look at them because it's interesting. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
It's really interesting. It sounds very legitimate to me.
Well, I mean, anomalies happen even in systems that are well run. So it doesn't mean that something nefarious happened.
I think they're alarmed because they think that somebody got involved in causing these anomalies, and they're afraid it will happen again.
I'll look. It's interesting. Thank you, Naomi. I appreciate it. I do.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You bet. Okay. Ron, you're next.
Hi, Edwin. Before I get to my comment, there's a video that it was the European Union or some meeting of European legislators, and they were asked to give us a moment of silence for Kirk, and they all started stomping their feet and pounding the desks. In other words, they're saying Hatzi Tatzi, good dead Nazi. Now here's where this thing is a beginning point.
Wait, hang on. I interrupt you for 1 second. I am not laughing because this man was shot and killed. That is terrible.
I know that.
Absolutely terrible. And I'm not even laughing that they were mocking him. What I'm laughing at is the incredible arrogance and stupidity of whatever American official decided it was a good idea for leaders from around the world to have a moment of silence for a political operative in the United States. That kind of arrogance and immediate revision of history Charlie Cook was a very, very talented political operative. No question. But most Americans don't know who he is and didn't until this week. And he's not a great leader of our nation. No, he's not. So the idea that they would do that is just a sign that they put their party ahead of everything in the world, and that is so dangerous. And so I was laughing at the stupidity of it, not at what happened to that poor man.
I know. Now, my point is, Alan Burr, the left-wing talk show host, was assassinated, machine gunned after a show because he took a stance against white supremacists. It was the order that assassinated him, and the investigation of him by the FBI no longer could be done because the FBI has now eliminated or cut down greatly the investigation of white supremacists in this country, who are the leading attackers and terrorist murderers in this country right now. and the orders and goals and have been incorporated into Kirk's thinking and Trump thinking of reversing this whole country's history of the Civil War, saying that the Civil War was a good thing. In other words, saying slavery was a good thing, maybe even coming back, bringing back slavery. So, and this thing about guns. Mr. Kirk was 100% more people, more guns, and he got a taste of. I hate to say it like this, but he got that point shoved down his throat pretty doggone hard. And they're calling for civil war, and they're blaming the left. So people, we have to be aware, be vigilant, and be very, very careful.
Yeah, I mean, Ron, I wouldn't use quite the language you used. It's a little harsh for me. I would say this, that when the right wing tries to make America more dangerous for some of us, they end up making it more dangerous for all of us. And that's the lesson that they learned, that they cannot arm every American and assume that only people on the left are going to get shot. They can't, the kids in those schools where there's school shootings are everybody's kids. They can't decide that politics is going to be brutal and weaponized and uncharitable and cruel and have the only people hurt are their political opponents. Everybody gets hurt. And maybe some of them will take this lesson. I mean, I know that's what the Republican governor of Utah was saying. Please, could be enormously dangerous for every American. Let's not go down this road. But Donald Trump went right down that road. Absolutely. Yep. And grieving as she is, I'll forgive her, but Charlie Kirk's widow went down that road. And Megyn Kelly went on television and went down that road. But on our side, we have not done so. We have not said, no one has said the man deserves to die. No one is calling for political violence on our side. I'm not saying that either. No, you're not. I know you're not. In fact, you, like all the rest of us, have joined peaceful protests, and you've helped organize peacefully to win at elections. That's what our side is doing. And, I mean, this battle is as old as time. It's love versus hate. And they're on the hate side, and we don't have to behave like them to beat them, but we have to call them out.
Yes. Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Ron. Really appreciate it. All right, let's go to North Carolina and Max.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Of course.
So anyways, I don't really watch the news. But I've been working at this place, and somebody was telling me about that young lady that got stabbed on the link, on the rail line, whatever you want to call it, and she died. So actually, I had a friend in Denmark who actually sent me the video of one of the radio hosts talking about it on his radio, and he was like one of the, I forget what his name is, but he used to be well known some time ago, and so I watched it and I was like, wow. I go, if you look at it, the people that are sitting there, they don't even notice. They're all watching their phones, and I think even the young lady was watching her phone. So I had to come home and put on my TV, and I put on the 3 channels, the 3 news channels to see what was going on. And so I watched it for like an hour. I just kept going back and forth to see what was happening for like about a week. And then this young man in Utah got killed. And then that day, she was gone. She was history. And she wasn't on that day. She wasn't on the next day. And he just got... And I think that when I turned the TV on, or maybe the first day on one channel, she was on. And then the rest of...
Who are you talking about?
The young lady that got stabbed on the rail line or the train.
Oh, I see. So this was a Ukrainian woman who was murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina, I think.
Charlotte, North Carolina. Okay, but what I'm getting at is that you know how like you hear that saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah.
So it was more that these people didn't care any more about her. What they were interested in was how were we going to make more money on her or him. And they dumped the young lady, forgot all about her, and they put him up, and they started showing him. And she, on 2 of the 3 channels, is not spoken of, since, it's not that long, but, since it happened, since he got killed, they don't talk about her anymore.
Well, I wish, I wish that were true. In fact, I'm afraid, Max, it's not. Because while they only talked about him while they thought it was a left-wing assassin, once they caught the guy and he wasn't a trans activist and he wasn't, raised in a left-wing house, they had to change their tune. So the White House had a press conference where their spokesperson was standing between 2 giant pictures, one of her and one of the alleged assailant, who is, on trial in the state. And they did that. Why? They did that because they are hunting for examples of a black person kills a white woman. That because they really want everyone to, they're just so animated with racial hate that she is back. And so I wish you were right. That story was gone. After all, the man's been caught. The man is going on trial for murder in the state. It's not a news story anymore. It's a court case. Yes, all of the above.
He's a mentally ill person being trialed. Okay,
yes.
So, so the thing is, our society, our government for profit, put them out there. Let them stay out there. Just like a lot of other crazy.
All of the above is true.
Yeah.
But, but he's an issue now because of racial hate. Yeah.
Okay, but what I'm saying about it is that for the time, maybe she's going to come back on all 3 of the channels, but for the time that I have watched it, I'm more or less seeing him because they're making more money off of him, and her,
you're probably right.
He will be forgotten. And that's all I wanted to say. That's all. That's what I'm seeing over here. Maybe over where you're at in Chicago, maybe they're showing both of them. But over here, I don't have the internet. I don't have cable TV. On the regular channels here, they just show them. I mean, that's who they're just showing him. That's what I'm saying. Just on the regular channel.
I got it.
That's all.
I got it.
All right. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet, Max. Hey, I'm going to go to Pam and close with Roosevelt. So, Pam, let's go for 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes and give the end time to Roosevelt.
Okay, I'm just going to try to be quick. I'm thankful for Mayor Johnson and Governor Pritzker's stand against this hateful administration. So I'm giving them both credit. Yes, the people certainly demonstrated, but it also takes leadership to stand up to them. So a lot of people don't want to give Mayor Johnson credit for whatever, but I'm glad he did. Next, I'm a little bit concerned because you gave Charlie Kirk the praise. Are you familiar with all that he said about black people? Because he is indeed all that he said about
Pam, let me interrupt just to be clear. There is nothing that Charlie Cook has said that I agree with. I think what's come out of his mouth has been vile, hateful, and tear the country apart. I think he is part of a resurgent right-wing recommitment to the kind of horrid racism that should be that every decent person should say there is no place for this anymore in our world. I couldn't agree with you more about that. So all I'm saying is he shouldn't have been murdered, right? That in our country, I know you're not. I'm just saying you and I agree about it.
Well, why would you have to qualify that? I'm not saying he deserved to be murdered.
I know you're not.
Said he is a racist, and I want people to know exactly what he said. You won't get that from some of these news sources, but if you go to
you'll never get it again. Yeah, no,
well,
what he said was
independent news sources. You'll get exactly what he said. So no, I'm not saying he deserved to be murdered. As for
I know you're not, Pam. I know you're not.
Okay,
I know you're not.
Thank you.
And I'm not saying I'm not giving him praise. I won't say what he said because I can't say it.
You said he's a talented political operative.
Absolutely right, You're right. He was a talented political operative. And
no,
politics
I don't agree with that. That's what you said.
No, I know. I'm saying it.
But let me move on. I know time is limited. Can I just get
thank you,
comment real quick? Really quickly, I just want people to know that you probably should get the internet because there are independent news sources who will tell the truth about what's really going on. This local news for me is nothing but entertainment, and they've been co-opted by every millionaire and billionaire who possibly could be a part of that Epstein sex trafficking ring.
What are your favorite news sources?
I'm never going to forget that.
What are the news sources you like?
For me, I'm going to Roland Martin. I'm looking at Joy Reid. I'm going to The Guardian. I'm going to The Independent. And then I'm looking for The Atlantic. I go to The Atlantic for some of the news sources.
All good sources.
I'm trying to go
and locally, we have like The Tribe, and we have a lot of good local sources too. Yeah.
I subscribe to Tribe, yes. So I'm looking for anyone who is going to deal in fact.
I totally agree.
So thank you.
Thank you for being part of this. I appreciate it. All right, Roosevelt, close us up.
I believe real quick, I'm going to add to what Pam said. Midas Touch, Lawrence O'Donnell, that's what I rely on also, along with the ones that were mentioned. But I want to follow up on what she said. Do you know how ridiculous not only what Charlie Cook said about minorities, black people, that there's a representative in Florida, a young woman, Cuban American, that's gathering signatures to hand them over to the speaker so that there could be a statue at the Capitol. It's so ridiculous how they're comparing this guy to MLK. That's how ridiculous it's gotten. He should be compared with the opposite of MLK. Point number one. Point number two, did you see that interview of Trump on Fox and Friends? What he said about the radical left? Everything is the fault of the radical left. He's doing this opposite of uniting this country. And look, there is no recourse for this guy and other people that already made up their mind, and even in our government, Mary Miller from Illinois, also following in the steps of the left, is at fault. It's ridiculous. What do you think about that?
All 3 points, 100% correct.